Jake Martinez wiped the sweat from his forehead as he stacked the last case of energy drinks in the campus convenience store. At 22, he was in his final year of college, working part-time to pay for his education while his friends enjoyed their spring break. The store was unusually quiet for a Friday afternoon, with most students either away or enjoying the warm weather outside. As he arranged the merchandise, Jake noticed a young woman browsing the snack aisle. She appeared to be around his age, with shoulder-length brown hair, and wearing simple jeans and a university sweatshirt. What caught his attention wasn't her appearance, but her behavior. She kept glancing around nervously, checking her phone repeatedly, and seemed to be waiting for something or someone. The woman approached the counter with a pack of gum, her hands slightly trembling as she reached for her wallet. Jake noticed she was carrying an expensive designer handbag that seemed out of place with her casual outfit. When she opened her wallet to pay, he caught a glimpse of what appeared to be several credit cards and a thick stack of cash. "Just the gum today?" Jake asked with his usual friendly customer service smile. She nodded quickly, avoiding eye contact. "Yes, thank you." Her voice was soft, almost whisper-like, and she had a slight accent that Jake couldn't quite place. As she turned to leave, she accidentally dropped a small piece of paper from her pocket. Jake picked it up, intending to return it, but she had already hurried out of the store. Curiosity got the better of him as he unfolded the paper. It contained an address written in neat handwriting, along with a time notation that read 3:30 p.m., Building 7, Room 204. Jake recognized the building number as one of the academic halls on campus. He glanced at the clock on the register. It was already 3:15 p.m. For reasons he couldn't fully explain, Jake felt compelled to return the paper to her. Maybe it was important information for a class or meeting. During his lunch break, which conveniently started in a few minutes, he decided to walk over to Building 7 to see if he could find her. The campus was relatively empty as Jake made his way across the quad. Building 7 housed mostly graduate-level courses and research facilities. As he climbed to the second floor, he could hear voices coming from room 204. The door was slightly ajar, and Jake approached cautiously, not wanting to interrupt if a class or meeting was in session. Through the small opening, he could see the woman from the store sitting at a table with two men in suits. They appeared to be having an intense conversation, though their voices were too low for Jake to make out specific words. The woman looked much more composed now, sitting straight and speaking with confidence that was completely different from her nervous demeanor in the store. Jake raised his hand to knock on the door when something stopped him cold. One of the men addressed the woman as Agent Rodriguez and handed her what appeared to be a manila folder marked with some kind of official seal. The woman opened the folder and began reviewing documents while the men continued speaking in hushed tones. "Agent Rodriguez?" Jake's mind raced as he tried to process what he was witnessing. The nervous college student from the store was apparently some kind of law enforcement agent or government official. He carefully backed away from the door, his heart pounding with the realization that he might have stumbled upon something he wasn't supposed to see. As he retreated down the hallway, Jake's mind filled with questions. Who was this woman really? What kind of operation was she involved in? And why was she disguised as a regular college student? The piece of paper in his pocket suddenly felt like it was burning a hole through his jeans. Instead of returning to work immediately, Jake found himself walking aimlessly around campus, trying to make sense of what he had witnessed. He thought about the expensive handbag, the stack of cash, and the way she had acted so nervous in the store. Was she working undercover? Was there some kind of investigation happening on campus that students weren't aware of? When Jake finally returned to the convenience store, his manager, Mrs. Chun, noticed his distracted state. "Everything okay, Jake? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just tired," Jake replied, though his mind was anything but restful. He spent the remainder of his shift mechanically going through the motions of his job while his thoughts remained fixated on the mysterious woman and what he had discovered. That evening, as Jake sat in his dorm room attempting to study for his upcoming economics exam, he found it impossible to concentrate. His roommate, Danny, was at his desk playing video games with his headphones on, completely oblivious to Jake's internal turmoil. Jake pulled out the piece of paper and examined it more closely under his desk lamp. The handwriting was precise and professional, nothing like the casual scribbles typical of student notes. The paper itself felt expensive, heavier than regular notebook paper. At the bottom corner, he noticed a small logo or watermark that he hadn't seen before. It appeared to be some kind of government insignia. Unable to resist, Jake opened his laptop and began searching for information about federal agencies that might operate on college campuses. He learned about various task forces that investigated everything from financial crimes to cybersecurity threats. The more he read, the more convinced he became that he had accidentally discovered some kind of undercover operation. As the hours passed, Jake found himself creating elaborate theories about what the woman might be investigating. Was there a drug ring operating on campus? Were there issues with financial aid fraud? Or perhaps something even more serious involving national security? By midnight, Jake had convinced himself that he needed to find out more. The rational part of his mind told him to simply forget what he had seen and mind his own business. But another part of him, perhaps influenced by too many spy movies and crime shows, was genuinely intrigued by the mystery. The next morning, Jake arrived at work early, hoping the woman might return to the store. He had rehearsed what he would say. He would simply return her paper and apologize for the delay. It seemed innocent enough, and maybe he could gauge her reaction to determine if his suspicions were correct. The morning shift passed slowly, with only a handful of regular customers stopping by for coffee and snacks. Jake found himself watching the entrance intently, jumping slightly every time the door chimed to announce a new customer. Around noon, just as Jake was beginning to think she wouldn't show up, the woman entered the store again. This time, she was wearing different clothes, a business casual outfit with slacks, and a blazer that made her look older and more professional. Her entire demeanor had changed from the previous day. She moved with purpose and confidence, scanning the store methodically as if assessing every corner and exit. Jake's pulse quickened as she approached the counter with a bottle of water and a sandwich. This was his opportunity to return the paper and see how she reacted. As she reached for her wallet, Jake cleared his throat nervously. "Excuse me," he began, his voice slightly shaky. "I think you dropped this yesterday." He held out the folded piece of paper, watching her face carefully for any sign of recognition or concern. The woman's eyes immediately focused on the paper, and, for just a moment, Jake saw a flash of something, surprise, perhaps even alarm, cross her features before her expression returned to neutral. "Thank you," she said simply, taking the paper from his hand. Her fingers brushed against his briefly, and Jake noticed they were remarkably steady despite what he assumed must be her concern about a security breach. "No problem," Jake replied, trying to sound casual. "I hope it wasn't anything important you needed right away." The woman studied his face for a moment, as if evaluating whether his gesture was genuine or if he posed some kind of threat. "It wasn't urgent," she finally said. "But I appreciate your honesty in returning it." As she paid for her items, Jake noticed she was using cash again, and this time he could see that the bills were crisp and new, as if they had come directly from a bank rather than from casual spending. She also handled the transaction with an efficiency that suggested she was accustomed to completing tasks quickly and moving on. "Have a good day," she said as she collected her change and items. But before turning to leave, she paused and looked directly at Jake. "I hope you have a safe and uneventful weekend." There was something in the way she emphasized the words safe and uneventful that sent a chill down Jake's spine. Was that a subtle warning? Was she suggesting that his curiosity might lead him into dangerous territory? As the woman left the store, Jake watched through the window as she walked across the parking lot. Instead of heading toward the student dormitories or academic buildings, she walked directly to a dark sedan with tinted windows that had been parked in the far corner of the lot. The car started immediately as she approached, suggesting that someone had been waiting for her. Jake felt a mixture of excitement and unease as he realized his suspicions were likely correct. The woman was definitely not an ordinary college student, and whatever operation she was involved in was apparently significant enough to require backup and surveillance vehicles. The rest of his shift passed in a blur as Jake mentally replayed every detail of their interaction. He analyzed her words, her body language, and the way she had handled the situation when he returned her paper. Everything pointed to someone who was trained in managing unexpected situations and maintaining her cover identity. That evening, Jake made a decision that would change everything. Instead of letting his curiosity fade away, he decided to conduct his own informal investigation. He reasoned that if there was some kind of federal operation happening on his campus, students had a right to know about it, especially if it might affect their safety or privacy. Using his student access to the university directory and online resources, Jake began researching recent events and activities that might have attracted federal attention. He looked into campus financial records that were publicly available, recent personnel changes, and any news reports about unusual incidents. What he discovered over the next several hours would prove to be far more complex and dangerous than anything he could have imagined, setting in motion a series of events that would test not only his courage but his understanding of right and wrong. Jake's research into campus activities initially yielded nothing particularly suspicious. He spent hours scrolling through university websites, student newspapers, and local news archives, searching for any indication of federal interest in his school. Most of what he found were routine stories about academic achievements, sports victories, and typical college life events. However, as Jake dug deeper into financial records and administrative changes, a pattern began to emerge. Over the past 6 months, several new staff members had been hired in administrative positions, all with backgrounds that seemed unusually impressive for a mid-sized state university. The new director of student financial services had previously worked for the Treasury Department. The recently appointed head of the campus computer center had a background in cybersecurity with what appeared to be classified government work. Most intriguingly, Jake discovered that a new research program had been established in the university's business department, focusing on something called economic pattern analysis in educational institutions. The program was funded by a grant from an organization Jake had never heard of, but when he searched for it online, he found almost no information beyond a basic website with vague descriptions of their work. The more Jake investigated, the more convinced he became that his campus was at the center of some kind of federal operation. But what exactly were they investigating? And what role did the woman he had encountered play in all of this? Jake's opportunity to learn more came sooner than expected. On Monday morning, as he was walking to his first class, he spotted the woman again. This time, she was sitting on a bench near the student center, apparently reading a textbook. She was back to wearing typical student attire, but Jake now noticed details he had missed before. Her shoes were expensive and practical, the kind worn by someone who needed to move quickly if necessary. Her backpack, while designed to look like a student model, was made of high-quality materials and had more compartments than typical campus bags. Jake decided to approach her, though he wasn't entirely sure what he planned to say. As he got closer, he realized she had been watching him in her peripheral vision, tracking his movement across the quad. When he was about 10 feet away, she looked up from her book and smiled. "Jake, isn't it?" she said, surprising him by knowing his name. "From the campus store?" "Yes," Jake replied, trying to hide his nervousness. "I'm sorry, I don't think I caught your name the other day." "I'm Maria," she responded smoothly. "Maria Rodriguez. I'm a graduate student in the business program." Jake noticed she used the same last name he had heard in the meeting, but presented it as if it were her real identity rather than a cover. This struck him as either very confident or somewhat careless, though he suspected nothing this woman did was truly careless. "Mind if I sit?" Jake asked, gesturing to the empty space on the bench beside her. Maria considered for a moment before nodding. "Of course. Are you enjoying the spring weather?" As they talked, Jake found Maria to be surprisingly easy to converse with. She asked appropriate questions about his studies and work and shared what seemed like genuine experiences about graduate school life. If he hadn't witnessed the meeting in Building 7, Jake would have had no reason to suspect she was anything other than what she claimed to be. "What's your research focus?" Jake asked, hoping to probe for more information about her real activities. "I'm studying financial patterns in educational institutions," Maria replied without hesitation. "Looking at how money flows through university systems and identifying unusual patterns that might indicate problems with resource allocation or potential fraud." Jake's heart rate increased as he realized she had just described exactly the kind of research that would require federal involvement. Was she telling him the truth about her investigation, or was this part of her cover story? "That sounds fascinating," Jake said, trying to keep his voice level. Have you found anything interesting here on campus? Maria's expression became slightly more guarded. It's still early in my research. But universities are complex financial ecosystems. Sometimes money doesn't flow where it's supposed to, and sometimes people take advantage of that complexity. The conversation continued for another 15 minutes, with Maria skillfully deflecting any questions that became too specific while maintaining the appearance of normal graduate student conversation. Jake found himself impressed by her ability to stay in character while still providing hints about the real nature of her work. As their conversation wound down, Maria gathered her books and prepared to leave. It was nice talking with you, Jake. Maybe I'll see you around campus again. I'm sure you will, Jake replied. I seem to be running into you a lot lately. Maria paused and looked at him directly. Jake, can I give you some friendly advice? College can be a distracting place, with lots of interesting things happening. But sometimes it's best to focus on your studies and your job, and not get too curious about things that don't directly concern you. There was no mistaking the warning in her words, though her tone remained friendly. Jake nodded, understanding that she knew he had figured out more than he was supposed to. Thanks for the advice, he said. I'll keep that in mind. After Maria left, Jake sat on the bench for several more minutes, processing their conversation. She had essentially confirmed his suspicions while simultaneously warning him to back off. But rather than discouraging his interest, the encounter only made him more curious about what was really happening. That evening, Jake decided to take a different approach to his investigation. Instead of researching the federal operation, he would try to understand what they might be investigating. If Maria was looking into financial irregularities at the university, there had to be some kind of problem that had attracted federal attention in the first place. Jake began by examining his own workplace more carefully. The campus convenience store was part of a larger network of food service operations managed by the university. As a regular employee, he had access to daily sales reports and inventory logs, though he had never paid much attention to them before. What he discovered when he started analyzing the data surprised him. There were significant discrepancies between inventory shipments and recorded sales, far more than could be explained by normal theft or spoilage. Certain high-value items like electronics and gift cards showed particularly large gaps between what was received and what was sold. More disturbing was the pattern Jake noticed in the timing of these discrepancies. They seemed to cluster around specific dates that corresponded with student financial aid disbursement periods. During the weeks when students received their aid payments, inventory losses spiked dramatically across all campus retail locations. Jake realized he might have stumbled onto exactly the kind of financial irregularity that would attract federal investigation. If someone was systematically stealing merchandise and timing their theft to coincide with periods when students had extra cash to spend, it could represent a significant fraud operation. But who would have the access and knowledge necessary to orchestrate such a scheme? Jake began thinking about the various people who had access to inventory systems, sales records, and knowledge of financial aid schedules. The list was longer than he had initially expected, including not just store employees but also administrators, security personnel, and various service contractors. As Jake delved deeper into his analysis, he began to understand why a federal investigation might be necessary. If the fraud was systematic and involved multiple locations across the university, the financial impact could be substantial enough to affect federal financial aid programs. Moreover, if the scheme involved identity theft or misuse of student financial information, it would definitely fall under federal jurisdiction. The next day, Jake found himself paying closer attention to everything happening around his workplace. He noticed patterns in employee behavior that he had previously overlooked. Certain staff members seemed to have access to areas and information that shouldn't have been part of their job responsibilities. Some deliveries were handled differently than others, with specific personnel always being present during certain shipments. Most concerning was Jake's realization that several of the irregularities he had identified in the records corresponded with days when he hadn't been working. It appeared that the most significant inventory losses occurred during shifts when only certain employees were present. Jake began to suspect that someone in the campus retail system was not only stealing merchandise, but potentially using the operation as a cover for a larger scheme involving student financial information. If criminals had found a way to access student aid data and coordinate their theft with aid distribution schedules, the implications were far more serious than simple inventory loss. As these possibilities crystallized in Jake's mind, he faced a crucial decision. He could continue trying to investigate on his own, potentially putting himself at risk if dangerous people were involved. He could try to approach Maria Rodriguez and offer to share what he had discovered, though he had no way to verify that she was actually a legitimate federal agent. Or he could report his concerns to university administration, though if administrators were involved in the scheme, that approach could be dangerous. Jake's contemplation of these options was interrupted when he arrived at work the next morning to find his manager, Mrs. Chun, in conversation with two people he had never seen before. One was a middle-aged man in a suit who had the bearing and appearance of a law enforcement officer. The other was a woman who looked like she might be from university administration. "Jake," Mrs. Chin called when she saw him arrive. "These people would like to speak with you about some inventory discrepancies we've been having. Could you spare a few minutes?" Jake's heart pounded as he realized his informal investigation had apparently attracted attention from people in positions of authority. As he walked toward the group, he wondered whether he was about to be questioned as a potential suspect or recruited as a witness to help with an ongoing investigation. The next few minutes would determine whether his curiosity about the mysterious woman had led him to become a valuable ally in uncovering campus crime, or whether he had inadvertently placed himself in the middle of a dangerous situation that was far beyond his ability to understand or control. The man in the suit introduced himself as Detective Morrison from the County Sheriff's Department, and the woman was Dr. Sarah Kim, the university's vice president for student affairs. Jake's nervousness increased as he realized this was a more serious situation than he had anticipated. "Jake, we understand you've been asking some questions about campus operations lately," Detective Morrison began, his tone professional but not accusatory. "We'd like to know what prompted your interest." Jake decided honesty was his best approach. He explained about finding Maria's paper and returning it to her, though he left out the details about witnessing her meeting with federal agents. He also described the inventory discrepancies he had noticed and his concerns about the timing patterns related to financial aid periods. As Jake spoke, he watched the adults' faces carefully. Dr. Kim seemed surprised by some of his observations, particularly about the correlation between aid disbursement dates and inventory losses. Detective Morrison took notes and asked detailed questions about specific dates and amounts Jake had noticed in the records. "Jake," Dr. Kim said when he finished explaining, "what you've observed is very helpful. We've been aware of some financial irregularities, and your insights about the timing patterns provide important confirmation of our suspicions." Detective Morrison leaned forward slightly. "We're going to ask you to do something that might seem unusual. We need you to continue working normally and keep your observations to yourself. Can you do that?" Before Jake could respond, Mrs. Chin spoke up. "Is Jake in any danger? Should I be concerned about his safety?" "We don't believe so," Detective Morrison replied. "But it's important that the people involved in this situation don't realize we're aware of their activities. Jake's continued presence and normal behavior helps maintain that cover." Jake felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. He was being asked to participate in what appeared to be an official investigation, but the implications were more serious than he had originally realized. Over the next several days, Jake found himself in the strange position of being both a regular college student and an unofficial observer for law enforcement. He continued his normal work routine while paying closer attention to the details Detective Morrison had asked him to monitor. The experience gave Jake a new perspective on his workplace and campus environment. He began to notice small things that had previously seemed insignificant, but now appeared potentially important. Certain delivery schedules, particular employee behaviors, and specific patterns of customer activity all took on new meaning. Jake also found himself wondering about Maria Rodriguez's exact role in the investigation. He hadn't seen her around campus since their conversation on the bench, but he suspected she was still operating somewhere in the area, possibly monitoring the situation from a different vantage point. His questions about Maria were answered the following week when Detective Morrison contacted him again. This time, they met at a coffee shop off campus, away from the university environment. "Jake, I want to thank you for your cooperation," Detective Morrison began. Your observations have been valuable to our investigation. But now I need to brief you on the larger situation so you can understand what's really been happening. Detective Morrison explained that the university had been the target of a sophisticated fraud operation involving multiple criminal groups. The scheme was far more complex than simple inventory theft. Criminals had infiltrated several university departments and were using their access to steal student financial information, manipulate aid disbursements, and coordinate retail theft to launder money and cover their tracks. The woman you know as Maria Rodriguez, Detective Morrison continued, is actually Special Agent Sarah Martinez from the FBI's Financial Crimes Task Force. She's been working undercover for several months to map out the extent of the criminal network and identify all the participants. Jake felt a combination of vindication and concern as he learned the truth about the woman he had encountered. His instincts about her identity had been correct, but the scope of what she was investigating was much larger than he had imagined. Are you telling me this because the investigation is over? Jake asked. Not exactly, Detective Morrison replied. We're preparing to make arrests, but we need to coordinate carefully to ensure we capture all the participants and recover as much of the stolen money and merchandise as possible. Your continued cooperation over the next few days will help ensure that happens successfully. Detective Morrison explained that the arrests would occur during the following week, timed to coincide with what the criminals believed would be another routine financial aid period. The law enforcement operation would involve multiple agencies and would take place simultaneously at several locations across the campus and surrounding community. Will I need to testify or anything like that? Jake asked, beginning to understand the legal implications of his involvement. Possibly, but not immediately, Detective Morrison responded. Right now, your primary role is to continue acting normally, so the criminals don't suspect anything has changed. As Jake returned to campus after their meeting, he felt overwhelmed by the knowledge he now possessed. Walking across the quad, he looked at familiar buildings and locations with completely different eyes, knowing that a major federal operation was about to unfold around him. The next few days passed slowly as Jake waited for the arrests to begin. He found it difficult to concentrate on his classes and normal activities, knowing that people around him were involved in serious criminal activity and that law enforcement was preparing to move against them. On Wednesday morning, Jake arrived at work to find unusual activity around campus. There were more security vehicles than normal, and he noticed people in suits who clearly weren't students or regular faculty members moving purposefully between buildings. Around noon, the operation began. Jake watched from the convenience store as law enforcement officers entered several campus buildings simultaneously. Within the span of 2 hours, he counted at least a dozen people being escorted from various locations in handcuffs. Mrs. Chun, who had been briefed about the basic situation earlier that week, stood beside Jake as they observed the arrests from their store window. I can't believe this was happening right under our noses, she said, shaking her head in amazement. Jake's role in the day's events wasn't finished. Detective Morrison arrived at the store with Agent Martinez, whom Jake finally met in her actual professional capacity rather than her undercover identity. Jake, Agent Martinez said, extending her hand, I wanted to thank you personally for your assistance. Your observations helped us confirm several important aspects of this case. She explained that Jake's analysis of the inventory discrepancies had provided crucial evidence about the timing and scope of the theft operation. His data had also helped law enforcement understand how the criminals were coordinating their activities with university financial aid schedules. What will happen to all the people who were arrested? Jake asked. Agent Martinez explained that the investigation had uncovered a network involving university employees, outside criminals, and several students who had been recruited to participate in various aspects of the fraud. The charges would range from theft and fraud to identity theft and money laundering, depending on each person's level of involvement. The financial impact was significant, she continued. Over the past 2 years, we estimate that more than $500,000 was stolen through various combinations of inventory theft, fraudulent financial aid claims, and misappropriation of university funds. As the immediate excitement of the arrests died down, Jake found himself reflecting on the entire experience. What had started as a simple act of returning a dropped piece of paper had led him into the middle of a major criminal investigation. His natural curiosity and analytical thinking had made him a valuable contributor to uncovering serious crimes that were affecting his university and fellow students. Dr. Kim visited Jake a few days later to discuss the situation from the university's perspective. She explained that the administration was implementing new security measures and oversight procedures to prevent similar problems in the future. Jake's insights about financial aid timing patterns were helping them develop better monitoring systems. "Jake, I hope this experience hasn't been too overwhelming," Dr. Kim said. "You should know that your actions help protect a lot of students from financial harm." As Jake completed his final semester and prepared for graduation, he often thought about the lessons he had learned from his accidental involvement in the federal investigation. He had discovered that paying attention to details and following up on small inconsistencies could reveal much larger problems. He had also learned that sometimes what appears to be a harmless prank or coincidence can actually be part of something much more serious. Most importantly, Jake realized that ordinary people in everyday situations sometimes have the opportunity to make a significant difference by being observant, asking questions, and taking appropriate action when they notice something wrong. The experience influenced Jake's career decisions as well. After graduation, he applied for and was accepted into a graduate program in criminal justice, with the goal of eventually working in financial crimes investigation. Agent Martinez had provided him with a letter of recommendation, noting his analytical abilities and his integrity under pressure. 6 months after the arrests, Jake received a letter informing him that the defendants had pleaded guilty to various charges and that the university had recovered most of the stolen funds through asset seizures and restitution agreements. Several new security measures had been implemented across the campus, and employee training programs now included education about recognizing and reporting financial irregularities. Jake kept in touch with Detective Morrison and Agent Martinez, who had become informal mentors as he pursued his new career path. They often reminded him that his experience demonstrated how important it was for citizens to stay alert and engage with their communities, rather than simply assuming that someone else was responsible for noticing and addressing problems. Looking back, Jake realized that his decision to return a seemingly insignificant piece of paper had changed not only his own life direction but had also helped protect his university community from ongoing criminal activity. The woman he had thought was just a nervous student had indeed been someone completely different, but discovering her true identity had led him to uncover his own potential to contribute to justice and community safety. The entire experience taught Jake that truth is often more complex and interesting than fiction, and that ordinary people can find themselves in extraordinary situations if they remain observant, curious, and willing to take appropriate action when circumstances require it. What had seemed like a harmless prank by fate had actually been the beginning of an adventure that shaped his understanding of responsibility, justice, and his own capabilities.